Okay, I've got some additional information coming up, like what are the best bearings for my skateboard or roller skates? I've heard some influencers and even some old school skaters say some rather uninformed things about bearings. Before we get to what bearings you need though, let me tell you what bearings you don't need. So listen closely guys, take some notes even. Okay, just kidding here. Okay, so unless you are trying to break the land speed record, you don't need ceramic bearings. You don't need bearings that are ABEC rated even. Despite what their marketing tells you, you don't need Swiss or American steel bearings, and you don't need bearings that are branded by anything other than a bearing manufacturer. After all, it is what they do. Bearings. So don't waste your money on groovy brands and gimmick bearings. Simple as that. Skateboards and roller skates are generally a 608 bearing. Though Dave, in case you haven't met Dave, he's our go-to dinosaur. So back in his day, some roller skates used 629 or 626 bearings. So what do all these numbers even mean? Despite what some influencers tell you, every bearing manufacturer follows the exact same code. That is one beautiful thing about bearings, is that they are internationally standardized. This ensures bearing manufacturers make the same sized bearing dependent on the bearing number. So, in the case of the 608 bearing, the 6 means that the bearing is a deep grooved bearing. This is simply the type of bearing that it is. Next, the 0 means that the bearing is of a light series. Now don't go thinking that your light series bearings are in any way flimsy or under par. That isn't what the light series means. The 8 simply relates to the 8 millimeter inside diameter. So how does this work for the 626 bearing? Okay, the 6, as we've already established, simply means that it's a deep grooved bearing. The 2, in this case, you might have already guessed it, it's saying it's a medium series bearing. And the 6, again, simply relates to the 6 millimeter inside diameter. So there you have the secrets to some bearing numbering sequences. So even the worst quality bearings in the world will still be those measurements. Why? Because bearings are internationally standardized. Interestingly enough, the 608 bearing is probably the most used bearing. They go in everything from starter motors, pool pumps, drills, whirlybirds on your roof, ninja blenders, 3D printers, and oh crikey, millions of other things, which means the technology to build them by the millions is cheap in comparison to the other bearings. So you shouldn't be paying a fortune for them. Now with all this said, of course there are rubbish bearings out there on the market. We all know it. So what is causing these bearings to be under par from reputable bearing manufacturers? This comes down to a couple of things. 1, bad or contaminated grease, and rubbish seals that don't do anything to truly keep the impurities out, or just simply low quality steel. It is that simple. So what do you need for a bearing for your skateboard or roller skates? It is just simply a reputable brand, first up, that isn't trying to market to you to spend more. I simply suggest a 608 ZZ bearing. The ZZ simply means metal steel shields on both sides of your bearing, and these have a rubber slinger inside. And this is what keeps the grease in and the dirt and impurities out. And it does this while still allowing the bearing to spin freely. So don't get ripped off. And if I do this right, there should be a link below to our special for an 8-pack or 16-pack of ITJ Japanese made 608ZZ bearings.